Guardians. It was a movie that came out in 2012, and it was pretty big when it came out, but a bit of a flash in the pan. But it's one of my favorite movies. I mean, when it came out, I was pretty obsessed with it. I saw it multiple times in theaters. I had posters up in my room, and I absolutely went and bought all of the books that the movie was based on by William Joyce and read them all multiple times. Yeah, it's based on a series of books. If you haven't read them, you should. They're great. Now, my friends also really liked the film, and we would talk about it together. But there's a point of debate. You see, they think that the movie is a Christmas film because it came out in November and Jack Frost is the protagonist and snow and all of that. I say, however, that it's an Easter film. After all, the whole film took place over Easter weekend, and kind of the point of the film was saving Easter. Henceforth, Easter movie. Luckily, I'm the one that's making this YouTube video, therefore I say that we're calling this an Easter film. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Happy Easter, everyone, and welcome to a very special Easter edition of Wysiwyg Visions. I could think of no better character to talk about on Easter than the Easter Bunny, and specifically Aster Bunnymund from Rise of the Guardians. Now, just to give you a heads up, I will be working with lore both from the movie and from the books. Now, the books do get kind of out there, just to give you a heads up, but I will let you know when I'm transitioning from movie lore into book lore. As we move forward, I am so sorry if I butcher any of these names or words. I looked them up on Google Translate, but as we all know, that's not the most accurate pronunciation, so please bear with me. To refresh your memory, in case it's been a while since you've seen the movie, each of the Guardians, each of the main characters in the movie is a guardian of childhood. They protect an aspect of a healthy, happy childhood. In the case of Jack Frost, the main character, spoiler warning, he is the guardian of fun. And when we're looking at Aster Bunnymund, he is the guardian of hope, which kind of makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Bunnymund spreads and fosters this hope through Easter each and every year. So he lives in his warren, which is found deep beneath Australia. At least it's found in Australia in the movies. In the books, it's found deep beneath Easter Island. But Bunnymund does say that his favorite country is Australia. So it works. So Bunnymund lives in the warren, and all year he grows and paints these beautifully colorful eggs. And on Easter Eve, he sends the eggs out and hides them all across the world for children to search for in the morning. And this is how he's able to generate and maintain a level of hope for these children. Another fun fact, and an aspect of being a guardian of hope, in the books at least, is that the warren is the birthplace of spring. So every year, spring is brought forth and was fostered and nurtured by the warren, and in part by Bunnymund. Now, the other thing about Bunny, which I promise we'll get to later, is he's not exactly a rabbit, at least not in the books. You see, in the movie, he does call himself a rabbit, very emphatically.
If you're not a kangaroo, what are you? I'm a bunny. The Easter Bunny.
But in the books, he is a creature known as a Puka. But I will touch more on that later, I promise. Now, that is a lot to unpack about Bunnymund. So let's break this down and start connecting it to the Easter Bunny and Puka legends here in the real world. Going into this project, I didn't really know too much about the origins of the Easter Bunny. I knew that the Easter Bunny would hide colorful eggs, which he may or may not have laid himself. I knew that the Easter Bunny would give gifts, so like Easter baskets, to good children. And I also unfortunately know about the existence of mall Easter bunnies, which are slightly terrifying to me. But beyond that, I didn't really know too much, so this was a lot of fun to dive in and see what was out there, and this was a much deeper hole than I was anticipating. So there is a lot of debate about the origins of the Easter Bunny. And in extension, there's actually a lot of debate about the origin of the Easter season itself. Easter is now widely considered a Christian holiday. However, it's believed to have its roots in the Anglo-Saxon season of Eostromene, which was the celebration of the goddess Eostre. Eostre was the goddess of fertility, of spring, and of the rising of the sun. All very hopeful things, but spoiler alert for later. Now, Aster was a great friend to children. She loved children. She loved to make them happy. So she turned her pet bird into a rabbit. And this rabbit laid beautiful, colorful eggs, which Aster would give to the children as gifts. Now, after the Christianization of the Anglo-Saxons, Eostromene became Easter, which was the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Eostromene's rabbit became eventually, especially in Germanic culture, the Easter Bunny, which was a character that would bring gifts to good children on Easter's Eve. Jacob Grimm from Brothers Grimm, the writers of all those fairy tales, summed up this transition from Eostre to the Easter season pretty well in his book that was published in 1835, and I'll read an excerpt from that. He wrote, "The Easter hare is unintelligible to me, but probably the hare was the sacred animal of Ostara. Ostara, Eostre, therefore seems to have been the divinity of the radiant dawn, of upspringing light, a spectacle that brings joy and blessing, whose meaning could easily be adapted by the resurrection day of the Christian's God." Now, the Easter Bunny was brought to the Americas in the late 17th century by German immigrants. These immigrants celebrate Osterhare with their children, or an Easter hare that would bring gifts to good children on Easter's Eve. To prepare for his coming, the children would build nests or baskets for the Osterhare to leave his gifts and eggs in. Over time, this tradition grew and spread, and the modern day Easter Bunny was born, complete with plastic eggs and milk chocolate bunnies. Alright, so let's take a look back at Bunnymund again in Rise of the Guardians. Bunnymund is the guardian of hope. And when you look at the stories that we just discussed, that seems pretty obvious to be just filled with hope. Eostromene was a celebration of Eostre, the goddess of fertility, spring, and the rising of the sun. All three of these things are a great source of hope. Now, don't forget that Eostromene was celebrated by a pre-modern society. This is the coming of spring. This is the marker that these people had survived winter, which at this point was a very difficult season. With spring comes warmer temperatures, comes a greater abundance of food and water, and a greater source of hope for the coming year. And it's the same thing in Christian traditions, where Easter celebrates the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the coming of eternal life, and the forgiveness of sins. With both of these comes hope and a guardian of hope. So it's not too far-fetched to make Bunnymund, who is the Easter Bunny, for the guardian of Easter, is the guardian of hope. And he perpetuates hope in his universe through Easter, and his eggs come from in the warren. Speaking of the warren, remember that the warren is located deep underneath Australia. And remember that bunnies are not native all across the world, including Australia. So Australia celebrates Easter, which in their case is the coming of fall instead of spring, with an Easter blimmy. A blimmy is a small native marsupial to Australia. It's about 22 inches in length. It has a long pointy nose and can have gray or white fur. And because it has long pointy ears, kind of like a rabbit, and because of its ears, it's sometimes called a rabbit-eared bandicoot. Now about the bunnies. After the European colonization of Australia, they brought with them rabbits for game hunting in the outback. And unfortunately, the rabbits outcompeted the blimmies and drove them almost to extinction, which is obviously a very big deal. So luckily today, the rabbit population is more under control. It's something that they're continuing to work on, and the blimmy population has continued to rise. However, unfortunately, one of the 2 blimmy species have gone extinct. Today, Australians celebrate Easter with Easter blimmies, and so it's not unusual for them to exchange chocolate blimmies instead of chocolate Easter bunnies. And a lot of these chocolate companies use the proceeds from these sales to support blimmy conservation. So I think that's kind of a cool spin on it. Now, Australia is not the only country to have non-Easter bunny animals. For example, Switzerland has Easter cuckoo birds instead of bunnies. Remember earlier in the video when I said that in the books, Bunnymund was not a rabbit but was a puka? Well, we're going to get into that now. In the book lore, Bunnymund came from another planet and lived in a village of Puka. His village was completely destroyed by the forces of darkness, and Bunnymund immigrated from his home world to Earth, where he dug out the warren, ushered in spring, and eventually joined the Guardians and became the Guardian of Hope. Now, the real world stories of Puka don't make them aliens, but they are pretty interesting. Most stories of Puka originate from Celtic tradition, and Puka were believed to be shapeshifters. They normally took the guise of hares, boars, dogs, goblins, or old men. Now, but they could turn into anything. When Puka turned into humans, they normally retained some sort of animal feature, like animal ears or a tail or something like that. Now, according to these stories, Puka could be the bringers of both good or bad fortune. It just kind of depended on their mood. They were very mischievous creatures. They normally only came out at night, but that wasn't a definite thing. It kind of differed from country to country. Most Puka lived in rural areas where there weren't a lot of other humans around. Now, there are lots of stories of Puka. One of the more common stories is when a Puka would take the shape of a horse and would invite riders who were usually drunk onto his back and then take them off on this wild, terrifying ride until dawn. And then as the dawn began to break, the Puka would buck the rider off and disappear. The rider would be terrified, scared, shaking, but left unharmed. Another common story of Puka is a Puka that kind of sits on the side of the road on a rock. And they would engage passerbyers in conversation, usually starting off with the phrase, "You must be new around here. I used to live in this house," and then would go on for an hour or two talking about either a tragic backstory or giving advice or prophecies. And the listener would just become engaged in this conversation. And eventually, the Puka would just kind of tire the conversation and decide that they were done and disappear. And the listener would be left wondering whether or not they had just dreamed that they were talking to this individual. So some commonalities between all of these stories is that Puka are very mischievous and they tend to have the gift of the gab. But they are also known to be grateful to people that give them a boon. So in another story, a young farmer realizes that there's a Puka around and leaves him a coat. In gratitude, the Puka goes to his mill and grinds his wheat into flour every night. The farmer at some point figures out something's going on, so he hides and sees the Puka doing him this favor. And so he leaves him a silk robe in gratitude. After he leaves him the robe, the Puka disappears, but he left the farmer in such good terms that he was set for life. When the farmer married, the Puka left him a gift of a golden goblet filled with a drink that ensured his happiness. There's other stories of Puka intervening when other more malevolent creatures would go to attack humans. So it's really up in the air whether or not a Puka is going to do something good or something bad. They're a very gray individual, but with all of these, the things that stay the same is they tend to have this frantic energy, and they absolutely love to talk, and they love to engage with humans. Now, if we take that and look at these aspects compared to Bunnymund, we do see quite a few similarities. For one, let's just say that Bunnymund isn't a shapeshifter. That would explain why he is a bunny in America, a blenny in Australia, and a cuckoo bird in Switzerland, and would account for all of these different Easter animals. But it goes a little bit further than that. While Bunnymund never really exhibits malevolence or even a lot of a sense of humor, at least not until after he starts hanging out with Jack Frost, he definitely has a gift of the gab, which you definitely see, especially as he interacts with North and Jack Frost. You also kind of see this frantic energy. He's always moving, he's always doing something, and that's very indicative of Celtic Puka lore. There are lots of counterpart stories to Puka across Europe. In the Channel Islands, Hook were fairies that were associated with ancient stones and were said to be rather mischievous and have a gift of the gab. In Norman France, their equivalent fairies were located around ancient tombs. Now, if you recall back to the Warren, one of the central points of the Warren were these ancient temples. So it's fun that they were able to integrate stories of Puka being associated with these ancient tombs and ancient stones into the Warren, which is associated with Bunnymund the Puka. Aster Bunnymund is the compilation of multiple stories and multiple traditions all rolled into one, which is not unlike our modern understanding of the Easter Bunny today. Every culture seems to have created their own Easter insert animal here and their own celebration of spring and rebirth based on their own understandings and their own traditions. But the thing that remains the same across all of these stories is hope. Whether that hope is for a new life, a rebirth, a warm season, or even just chocolate and some plastic Easter eggs. Thank you so much for watching this very special Easter edition of Wysiwyg Visions. If you have any fandoms or topics or stories that you'd like me to look into, let me know in the comments below. Also in the description below, I have a link that you can submit directly to a Google form, and that will go directly to me, so I'll be able to see that. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring the notification bell. I will be posting every first and third Tuesday of the month. Thank you again, and I'll see you around. Keep it nerdy.